included in that. And something like 2.5 million Muslims fought for the Allied cause in the First World War. And then if you include other roles like labor and other ancillary jobs, the total is something like 4 million. So it's a massive amount, a huge contribution and huge sacrifices. And Luc will tell us about this. And he's already, well, in his research, him and his colleagues managed to track down and identify more than 900,000 documents relating to these subjects. And he's presented his findings in his book, The Unknown Fallen, which is a lovely book, and we'll have an opportunity, if we want to find out how to buy it, we'll have an opportunity to do that later. So he's presented the book and this subject at the United Nations. He's been a keynote speaker at the International Military Religious Leaders Conference at the Defence Academy. He's also presented at the Scottish Parliament, the House of Lords, King's College London, Harvard University, and the Central Mosque in London, and as well as giving talks in the United States, where he is currently. And as I say, the book is a beautiful book, The Unknown Fallen. It's a coffee table book that came out a couple of years ago called The Unknown Fallen. And I was just doing a little bit of research myself. There was a BBC article about this, you know, to coincide with the anniversary of the First World War. And as a survey of people in Britain, it found that only 22% knew of people knew that Muslim soldiers fought in the First World War. So there's still a lot of astonishing level of misinformation and you know, lack of knowledge. And but anyway, Luc will explain a lot of these things, and we've got slides and things. So I'll let you take over, Luc. But we're very grateful for your contribution tonight.
Oh no, thank you, Richard and Ali Bahaj for the invitation and give me the opportunity to talk, because that's my job, talking about the project and try to generate something so that it gets spread. I also want to thank Ilju for the technical support he's going to give. He's in charge of the slides, so he's really in control because I'm going to follow the slides. Okay, so thank you so much for making time to listen. After the presentation, we have some time for Q&A that Richard will moderate on. And well, okay, Ilju, let's start. So for me, it was a surprise that we had the British Moroccan Society, because in my mind, it's French Moroccan all the time. So once again, I think it's a unique opportunity to talk with British people and Moroccan people about our shared history. You can have the next slide to explain the people. And I have to do this. I know maybe it sounds a bit boring, but we have a lot of prejudice today, and in conferences and in meetings, I have to explain what we are not. This is where we are to. First of all, I have to say I'm not a historian, I'm a researcher. You know, my background is in aviation. It's a long story, but I'm a researcher. So what I'm doing is I'm traveling around, finding pieces of documents, audios, film fragments, and I put them on the table, and I let the historians and the people want to think about it. So I try to stay away from making interpretations or put it in a certain page. What I know is what I found, but it's always so beautiful that I don't want to touch it. I want to have it like we found the material without contaminating it with my ideas, with my vision or the timeline we're in today. So the Forgotten Heroes Foundation, we are not governmental. We have a headquarters in the UK. We are totally independent. We're not political. We are no army recruiting department. That is a question we get a lot asked from schools. Are you here to recruit soldiers? Are you paid by the army? No. We are no pro-colonial empire propaganda tool. So we're not glorifying the war. It was a useless war. It's very important to know that the First World War, if you look at it, according to Mark, there was no reason to have that war. It was a war about egos, about borders, about minerals, pretty quite the same as we are today. Very scary sometimes, but it was not real. It was not like the Second World War, where you need to have that fight against an evil ideology, fascism. So, and we're not going to funded by any government or organization. And our whole operation is funded by individuals and organizations who buy our book and who make small donations. Will you? So what did we do in that 8 years of research? We traveled around. And we did 19 countries, including Russia and America, Canada, but also China. And we found 38 locations, of which 35 were government, military, diplomatic, public, but 65 private family collections. And that's really important. It's amazing how many private collections there are from individuals and families who have just collected everything from their ancestors and created a small library, a small archive. And in the middle of nowhere, even in Morocco, you have families in the middle of nowhere who have treasures of documents of their ancestors who fought in the First, Second World War. So of all our research of the 900,000 documents and artifacts, 65% is from private and family collections, and only 35 from government and diplomatic. And the number of documents we have been able to analyze is approximately 50. Now, what I need to explain to a lot of people is why archives are so important is because they are so vulnerable. And through history, for many people, many rulers, archives are dangerous because they give us a lot of information about our background, about how things were in the past. And I will give you a short summary about the most important archives that have been destroyed. Is to give you an idea, and I think it's really important, how much we need to do more to preserve what has left. In 1940, during the Second World War, the German invasion of Leuven was destroyed by the Germans. 1 million manuscripts and books were destroyed. Also, the libraries in Belgrado, with the book collections of 500,000 volumes and more than 2 million journals, were destroyed. The Oriental Institute in Sarajevo in 1992 were destroyed. Members of the Army of the Republic of Serbia in 1992 also, in Bosnia, destroyed the whole library. In Baghdad, the most precious libraries and archives were destroyed in 2003. In 2014, the libraries and the archives of Bosnia-Herzegovina were destroyed. And in Iraq, in 2014, the library of Mosul was completely destroyed by Daesh and ISIS. In these archives, no copies were made. And why do I mention these archives? Because we know that a huge amount of documents and books were dedicated to the Muslims in the First World War, including Moroccans. So you see, when do you destroy these archives? It's because you don't want people to know about Muslims, about the background and the engagement of Muslims in European community. Certainly in the Balkan, it was on the agenda, destroy libraries, destroy archives that refer to Muslims, to the Muslim impact on culture, on literature, on music, on politics, on religion. And this is why we need to do more to preserve everything that we can find on them. Ilulu? So what do we know? And I know, I see half of my audience is British and say, oh, another thing about the First World War, we know all about it. That's not true, it's because you are interested. And I will give you some figures, what people know, and it's a survey that was commissioned by the British Armed Soldiers and Soldiers Families Association in 2018. So I'm going to give you the figures, which is really, really shocking. By 2,000 people in 2018. In 2018, we are at the end of the commemoration of the First World War. Billions have been spent on activities, events, presentations, VIP receptions. So they are asking 2,000 people in the UK between 18 and 25, what was the bloodiest battle in the First World War? 19% said Pearl Harbor. 8% say Independence Day. 7% say the Battle of Hastings. And 5% was convinced it was Helm's Deep. Helm's Deep is from the Lord of the Rings. It's an imaginary. So there you go, 4 years commemoration activities. In the questionnaire, they was also asking who was the prime minister in the First World War. 50%, half of them was convinced it was Winston Churchill. And 10% mentioned Margaret Thatcher. And to make it worse, they were asking who were the British fighting against. 25% said the French. And 15% said we were fighting against the Russians. What triggered the First World War was in the questionnaire. 6% said it was the assassination of J.F. Kennedy. Now, it goes on like this. Now, if you put the huge amount of money they have spent, and then you have a questionnaire, a survey like this, which was really well done, then you can only say that we missed a big opportunity. Because now the attention is already focused on the Second World War. But if you see what has the youth, the young people learned about the First World War during that 4 years of commemoration, well, this is the result. So everything, we didn't reach the grassroots community. Now, can you imagine if there had been one question about Muslims? It would have been much, much worse. I don't know what they would have replied, but it would have been very bad. Do you? So, in our research, we discovered that in total, military and laborers were approximately today, we can say 4.5 million Muslims from the Middle East, North Africa, Southeast Asia. And also there were 5,000 Muslims from the United States. That includes also the 1.5 million Muslims from Russia. Nobody is looking at the fact that the 1.5 million Muslim Russians were the Cossacks. They were the bravest. They were the Tatars. They were Muslim. There were little people know that. Among the Chinese laborers, 50% were Muslim. Nobody talking about it. Certainly know what's happening in China. So, and in all that, when we were doing that research, we were trying to find the contribution. But in our search to find the global Muslim contribution, we discovered humanity. We discovered stories about beauty, about tolerance, about mutual respect, about interfaith avant la lettre, even before the name was invented, how these Muslims and the allies really fought together. And when you do that research, then you find out and you see that, why don't we talk about the fact that many of these Muslims, including the Moroccan Muslims, were more decorated than any European counterparts. It also contradicts the myth that Muslims have not played a positive role in Europe or to modern history. So we are making the case that Muslims are stakeholders in modern society in Europe. Because when you're talking with people, and you mentioned there were 4.5 million Muslims fighting for the liberation of Europe, doesn't that make Muslims stakeholder in Europe? I think it's worth talking about that. So, but in the short representation, I will focus on Moroccans because I have been invited by you. So let's have some talk about Morocco. You. So Morocco was a French protectorate since 1912. And it is important when you mention the Moroccan contribution that the Sultan Moulay Youssef, he was very supportive of the Allied forces. So many Moroccans joined because they were convinced it was a moral and religious duty to serve the French, because the Sultan was also the holder of the faithful and the holder of the religious symbolism. So they listened, they answered his call, not the French call. They answered the call from the Sultan. That's a big difference. Who were they fighting for? They were fighting for the Sultan, who was very loyal. Now, the numbers about the Moroccan contribution in the First World are not very precise for many reasons, but we can estimate them between 63,000 and 75,000. Now, that's very considerable, that's huge, because the Moroccan male population at that time was about 5.4 million and a half. But only half of them were eligible to serve in the army for recruitment, because the other 2.5 million people were too old or too young. So when you take the 75,000 people of the 2.5, not including the 37,000 laborers, then you have an enlisting of 6%. So 6% of the available male population was pulled out of the Moroccan economy, about Morocco, to serve on the battlefront. And another figure that is really astonishing is that the Moroccans were one of the nations that lost the most soldiers compared with others. They lost 20.5% of their manpower, killed or missing. The French lost 24, the Senegalese 22, and the Algerians 15. And I will show you that it was not because they were bad fighters. No, on the contrary, they were fierce fighters. So when you talk about this, it's time to unveil that story, to put it on the table if you see how Europe and the world is looking to Morocco. You have to tell the French, the Belgian, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, once upon a time, you had Morocco in 1914. And I believe that these kinds of histories and memories become in their own way as an added value to the edifice of European culture and identity. So my goal of injecting these new narratives into public memory is therefore not simply a matter of recognizing the contribution of unknown heroes, but more importantly of integrating these histories within European history and collective memory so that we will remember them. One of the reasons that we don't have the exact numbers of Moroccans is in a way a bit funny, because when a lot of Moroccans arrived, it was chaos in the harbor of Marseille. And when we did research in Marseille, then it is difficult to find something like Moroccans, because the communication was very bad. French was not optimal. The French officers didn't speak Arabic or whatever. So when they were asking, are you from Morocco? Because they were coming in on the ships with Algerians, with Tunisians. Many of these people said, no, I'm Berber, I'm Amazi, I'm Riffian, I'm Zayunis. So what did the officer write down? He said Berber, Riffian. Or even they mentioned something else. They mentioned, I'm from Ujja. And so when you go to these archives and you're doing research for Moroccans, sometimes it's stunning how very few files you find. But when you search Berbers, then you find the Moroccans. Also, a lot of these Moroccan soldiers didn't understand the questions and said, I'm Spahi, I'm tirailleur. And the guy didn't know what's a Spahi, and he wrote in Spahi. It's not a country, it's cavalry, you know? So it went into the archives, and people keep classifying this as some kind of tribe. And this is why sometimes it's difficult to find the exact figures about how many Moroccans contributed, because they're not filed under Moroccans. Because of the short presentation, I'm going to talk about something very specific about Morocco. You can have the next slide. And it's the Battle of the Marne. Now, a lot of people know about the Battle of the Marne, but I want to highlight this because it's really a jaw-dropping historical event explaining Moroccan heroism that nobody or little are aware of. The Battle of the Marne, until today, has mostly been approached from the French side, never from the Moroccan side, and even less from the German side. So the Battle of the Marne is very important in history because the Germans had breached the lines of the French expedition force, and it was pure chaos. In 1914, the war has just started, and the German troops had run over the French and the British. They made a lot of mistakes, and suddenly the Germans, you can see the small circle is Paris, and the Germans are on the hill on the Marne, and they can see Paris, and they're celebrating because there's no defense left. The French and the British expedition are spread over. There's not even a line anymore, except to Verdun, but the Germans don't care about Verdun, they want Paris. Now, at that moment, France was in shock. The Germans were in front of Paris, and there was no line of defense. To understand the panic, I will show you the next slide. You have to know that at that time, the French were, and Europe was overwhelmed by the stories about the atrocities that the Germans were committing in Belgium. You had the rape of Belgium. It was discussed in the New York Times worldwide. So the Germans were burning everything down. They were executing civilians, the rape and plundering. So Paris knew, is this going to happen to us? So we need to leave. So the only thing that the French had, the people in Paris were doing, was they went to the church and they started praying. You know, you have these workers, the church were overcrowded. People were praying on their knees on the street for a miracle. But no miracle, no defense. So the French needed extra manpower. And who is the extra manpower? The Moroccans that you can see on the next slides. So the Moroccans, they were just starting to recruit soldiers, and seeing the danger happening in the Marne, the first regiment of Moroccans left in August the shores of Morocco. 4,300 Moroccan soldiers under the commander of Captain Juin. He later became Marshal Juin. So they're leaving in August in 1914, and they are really being rushed into the boats across the Mediterranean Sea, and they're being put in taxis, driving to the battlefront. Can you imagine? All these soldiers are being put in taxis, driving to the battlefront. So these Moroccans, they were already exhausted when they arrived on the Marne. They've never been in Paris, never seen Paris. They don't see Paris, they go to the battlefront. And then they see what's happening. They get instructions, and it said, look, the Germans are there. We are the last line of defense. So on the next slide, I will tell you now about the battle. You must imagine you have 4,300 Moroccans and you have 175,000 Germans. And Captain Join has to tell them, look, you are the last line of defense. We need to buy 3 days. So the French and the British can close the gap again. There was a gap of 30 miles, 48 kilometers. So they had to make sure they could close it. Now, these Moroccans, they must have looked at Captain Join and tell them, what do you mean? We are 4,300. There are 175,000 Germans over there. And we have to hold the line. And said, we have to buy 3 days. So what we did was doing the research from the French archives, but also the German archive, because we wanted to understand what happened. So these French Moroccans, they were regular soldiers. So they had a discussion with Captain Jem, who had a huge respect for Moroccans and the soldiers. And he said, look, they're gonna run over us. It doesn't make sense, you know, we're dead. Tell us what you want, we are dead. The one reason we can do it is try to distract them and confuse them by launching a counterattack. So Captain Join was engaging in a discussion with his troops and saying, they know we are not huge, we're only 4,300. So how do you see an attack? So they could convince him to launch an attack by like really intense, going deep into the ranks and just confuse them by the violence they would create. And Captain Join said, it's your choice, it's your call, you know, we need 3 days. That's all we need to do. That's our mission. And they agreed. So he informed headquarters that they would launch an attack. And we still haven't figured out if it was a coincidence or they delayed it 1 day, but they were granted to perform Juma on Friday, the 4th of September, to launch the attack early in the morning on Saturday, the 6th of September. Now we know from records that Juma on Friday was very emotional between the soldiers, but also the French who were looking at that because they knew this was a suicide mission. So on 5 September, early morning, the Moroccans launched their attack. Doing research on the German side, they were confused. They were saying, what are the guys doing? Because they had their intelligence. They say, they're only a few thousand and there's no backup. We know there is no huge backup between them. So they said, oh, they want to try to confuse us. So their defense was just defense, just defending their line. But when the evening was falling, the Moroccans kept pushing and keep fighting. And they were changing tactics every day from guerrilla to frontline battles. They're changing their position in small groups. And during the night, they were penetrating the first line of the Germans, and the Germans were starting to think, are we missing something here? Because they're really pushing very hard. And by the morning, they were asking other soldiers and intelligence, what is wrong with that? And then we found communication that was happening on the 6th, the next day. And the 7th, they were asking their Ottoman officers, is it permitted for Muslims to commit suicide? And say, no, 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 you cannot commit suicide. So in the German logic, they were trying to figure out what these Moroccans are doing is suicide. Because they were penetrating so deep in the enemy lines of the Germans that there was no way back. So the Germans were saying, what's wrong? But they think they can go back, or there is backing coming up for them because it is suicide, but they're not allowed to do suicide. So the confusion was taking over between the German command and said, something is not right. They cannot commit suicide, but they're losing so many people. They're going so deep in all enemy lines, they never will make it back. And on the 7th, they started to pull back. And on the 8th, the French and the British Expedition Front closed the line. They had created the 3 days the Allied forces needed. It's a very amazing story because they're fighting for a country they don't know. They're fighting for a war that's not their own. Still, they have that commitment. It's about honor. It's about commitment. So the sacrifice, as you can see on the next slide, was huge. Of the 4,300 Moroccan soldiers, only 800 survived. 800 of the 4,300. The Germans called them, in French, les hirondelles de la mort. It means swallows of death, because they had a blue tunic on. They were like swallows. They keep attacking, they keep coming in into their lines. And the Germans were stunned by the bravery of these Moroccan soldiers. So when we were discovering that, and we were telling that the French, they were falling off their chair. They had no idea. They had no idea about that Moroccan contribution, about the sacrifice in 3 days, and that we know without them, Paris would have fallen. That's a fact. All historians agree on that. So the funny thing is, so you can see on the next slide, when Paris, the people in Paris heard that the Germans had retrieved and the lines were closed again by the French and the British Expedition Force, there was a big party. All the bells were ringing in the churches. People were falling on their knees, big celebration, because God had listened to them, had fulfilled their request and sent angels. He didn't send angels. He sent 4,300 Moroccans. But nobody mentioned that, nobody knew. It's only when we were doing the research that people start to understand that these angels, these people were tanking, were in fact Muslims. They were not even Christian. They were not French. They were Muslims from Morocco. Still today, in all the books in France, in French schools, there's not a word mentioned about the brave Moroccan Muslims. They mention the miracle of the Marne. They don't mention the Moroccan Muslims. So, as you can see on the next slide, we were really, when we handed over our documents to the French government and to the French historians, they start looking into that. And then we were very pleased to be invited on the 9th of September in 2018 to attend the unveiling of a small monument dedicated to these Moroccans, funded by the Moroccan government and the French government. It's a small thing, but it's a start. You know, it's a small tribute. And for us, we were happy that somebody had looked into our research, verified this, scrutinized it, checked all the dots and the T's and said, yes, it is the truth, c'est la vérité. So it was a good motivation for us to move on with this. And this is the Battle of the Marne. This is only one battle. There are many more things on that, but it's a fascinating thing about the Muslim Moroccan contribution in the First World War. So there is only one battle, because I only have 45 minutes, I have to move quickly. On the next slide, I want to tell you about loyalty. So very few people know that the Moroccan division was one of the most decorated in the French army, not only in the Battle of the Marne, but in all the battles. So it's something that when I tell young Moroccans in France, in the UK, in America, they don't believe it. They say, what do you say? We got more decorated than French soldiers. So, and it's because they have lost confidence in their history, in what they do, in their contribution. They don't know. And because they don't know, sometimes they think I'm making that up. I have to show the document and say, no, it's true. It's about you, it's about your ancestors. So we have a shared history, but if you don't know your history, you're like a leaf on a tree that doesn't know it belongs to a tree. You think you're alone. No, you're part of that huge tree. And this is what we want to explain to young Moroccans. You're part of that history. These are your ancestors. So it's important to tell. On the next slide, another important thing is, in short, the first mosque in Germany was built in a prison of war camp, where they assembled all the Muslim prisoners of war from undivided India, Pakistan, Russia, Algeria, Senegal, with the aim to convince them to fight against the colonial rulers or against the European. And the French and the British were very worried that a massive amount would defect and join the Germans and the Ottomans. It didn't happen. A few hundreds. From the Moroccans, no. Neil Moroccan, even in hardship, changed side. And it's because they are loyal. Muslims are loyal. When they engage to something, they stay their word. They had committed themselves to the Sultan, they stay their word. It's something challenging the prejudice we have today about Muslims and Moroccans. They're not loyal, you know, they're swapping. It's not true. If they believe in something, they have given their promise. This is what we can learn from them. And they challenged, these Muslims, they challenged also the French and the British, because we found in the records that they were really worried. They thought more than half would defect, only a few hundred of the 83,000 prisoners of war. Compassion on the next slide. You know, it's a really funny thing. These are Moroccans, and they are nursing a wounded German soldier on the battlefield. Now, in the First World War, there was no Convention of Geneva. It regularly happened that prisoners of war were shot on the battlefield because there was no time, there was no means to bring them after the trenches in safe areas and move them to prisoner of war camps. So it happened. Now, we have found reports from British and Canadian and French officers that they say, can you imagine something? These Muslims, these Moroccan Muslims, they come to us and they say, look, we're going to hand over our prisoners of war that we captured on one condition. You have to promise us, you don't shoot them. You do not put them in cages. You feed them. They should not beg for their substance. And they were explaining, these Moroccan Muslims, this is the enemy. They're using chemical weapons. They're using flamethrowers. And you're lecturing me how to treat prisoners of war? And they just say, if you don't make that promise, we will not hand them over. And asking them why, they refer to the Quran. They say, it's so fake. This is what we are. We do not torture people. We take care of prisoners of war. This is how it's stipulated in the Quran. So these officers were being lectured by these illiterate, never forget, illiterate soldiers about humanity, about the Convention of Geneva. We don't exist. We had the Convention of Den Haag. So it's something to think about. It's something to take with you. The next slide. I don't know how much time do I have, Richard, left?
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Please, don't worry. You at least half an hour because it's so good. I don't want you to feel rushed. So please carry on.
Okay. So another thing about the respect. So you have these Muslims from all these countries traveling, fighting with these European soldiers, including my grandfather. And respect you earn. Respect you earn. And these Allied soldiers, they were viewing, they were explaining that these Muslim soldiers, they didn't run away. They did not defect. They never left anyone behind on the battlefield. Muslims never left anyone on the battlefield. And there were huge discussions going on between these officers saying, look, the guy is going to die anyway. You lost 3 people by retrieving that soldier from no man's land, and you lost 2 guys. And they always receive the same answer. It's what we are. We know that person, he is a father. If he dies, his family will die. We'll have no income, so we need to rescue his life. So, but of course, you had these soldiers trying to comfort these wounded and dying Muslim soldiers, but they had no clue. What is a Muslim? What are they talking? We don't understand their languages. We have no idea what Islam is. How do we comfort them when they die? So when we're starting our research, we found some letters about officers asking for instructions and say, we have soldiers in the trenches asking for instructions. How do we bury Muslims? Can we touch them? How do we do that? We don't want to insult them because they are our brother in arms. And when I mentioned that to some historians, they said, oh, it's romanticizing. It's very rare it happens. But I'm a bit stubborn. I kept looking in all these attics and basements for documents who were fading away. And then I found more letters and said, something is true. It's not exaggerated. It must have very deep. Otherwise, these officers wouldn't keep insisting, asking for instructions to headquarters. And in a very small library outside Lyon in French, we found the original letter of the Milleran. His original letter in a small basin, not in Paris, outside Lyon, which I call the smoking gun that it was real, because the Milleran was the Minister of War, Minister of Defense at that time. And he writes a letter under pressure of these officers with an instructions how to bury Muslims. But he does more. He gives an instructions to all soldiers who are battling on the battlefield in France, how to comfort them when they are dying. Now, you must understand, at that time and today, French is a secular state. You have laïcité. There's a division between religion and state. So by writing that letter and giving an order, it's not a guideline, it's an order, they have to comply. He's breaching the constitution because he's not allowed to get interfered and make soldiers obey to do a religious rite on what kind of ever, not only Muslim, but Christians, Hindu, Sikh. So he's really making a big statement, and he doesn't do that like this, and he doesn't wait years. It's written in December. And I've published the letter, original letter in the book, otherwise people would keep saying that I made it up. But it's really important what he writes. I will read it from the book. So what does he write? He writes, when a Muslim is about to die, he will always, when he can, pronounce the Shahada, setting the index of the right hand or holding the Quran. If his state does not allow him to do so himself, anybody present is obliged, I repeat, obliged, to help him and pronounce for him this profession of Muslim faith. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is a messenger of Allah. And they did it. Soldiers on the battlefield, when they found a Muslim who was dying, they say the word mainly in French, but we know other soldiers studied in Arabic, so the soldier could hear what he was saying, and they were holding his hand. They were holding his finger. Now, this is something I want you to reflect on. You have non-Muslim soldiers pronouncing the Shahada on the battlefield to confront the dying Muslim soldiers. If that's not an issue, what is all this rambling we see today? What's going on? Where did we lose this? Where did we get lost? As for these non-Muslim soldiers, it was not an issue to pronounce the Shahada to comfort the dying Muslim soldiers. And these guys were not religious. You don't do that if you don't respect somebody, if you don't respect their faith. So there's a lot of more research to do that, but I use it to open a debate. Sometimes when I give here colloquiums, I start with this. And so now let's have a debate on that. Would you do it today? Young Muslims difficult to believe this. This is only 100 years ago, but what's going on? What's about the division? We are all children of the same book, Abrahamic faith. Most people, children, don't know what Abrahamic faith is anymore. So this is a testament, this is a testimony of respect, that it is possible. Young kids are asking, also when these young soldiers, non-Muslim, when they were saying the Shahada, did they become Muslim? I have to explain them, no, you don't become Muslim because you say the Shahada, if the intention is not there. And it's not a curse as well. Some people say, oh, if you say Allah Akbar or you say the Shahada, then it's like a spell. It's not. It's beauty, you know, it's respect. It's something for you to take away and say, okay, what can we learn from this? What can we learn from that document? What should we do with this? Can we opening a new debate? Can we reset the button 100 years ago, once upon a time? So I think it's a beautiful document. So this is why with one of the slides I want to end with, is that important that we remember them. So it is not only all the souls as a general, but also the Muslims. But what we need to do more from the Muslim community is we should remember them from within the Muslim community. The French and the British government are doing a lot of efforts to maintain the graves of Muslim soldiers all over the world. But less than 1 in 1,000 visitors is Muslim. And that's not good. This is a story children and people should be proud of. It's a sense of belonging. You know, we were there. We have the right. But we need to earn that right and focus on that and share the story with some people. If some European guy comes to you and say, you don't belong here, I want your children to reply, I want Muslim children to reply, what do you mean I don't belong here? We sacrificed 4.5 million Muslims in the First World War, liberating Europe. If that doesn't make us a stakeholder, what does? What else more do we have to do? I don't want even to go further in history and start with the contribution from the Moors in Spain, you know, Cordoba, Sevilla. I don't want to even go that far, only the First World War. It's giving them a tool. I want to give young Muslims, young Moroccans, Algerians, Tunisians, Pakistani, Arabs, a sense of belonging and say, we have a shared history. And this allows me to tell you, we have a huge challenge, problem. Every day we're receiving inquiries from schools and libraries. If they would get could get a free book, but we're not funded. We cannot do that. And they tell us we don't have any budget. There are other priorities. So for this moment, my foundation has a waiting list for, I think, more than 750 schools, libraries, madrasa, who are waiting for a free copy. And we keep asking companies and organizations and businessmen, could you purchase a copy and give it to a library so they have access to it? Because these communities are mostly poor. So we are withholding it from them. So the most important thing is to share it and to bring it up, not only to Muslims, but also non-Muslims, that this is not a fairy tale, these are real facts. My book has been scrutinized by so many organizations, not only the UN, but even by the Daily Mail. They have a copy of my book, they didn't write about it. I don't know why. But so we need to do something with that information. We need to start building bridges of knowledge between Muslims and non-Muslim school kids and say, look, we were there as well. We should remember them. It's a very difficult situation. And this is why we have created that book that you can see on the next slide. But also we have created a small jewel. You know, we have the poppy flower. I'm not on the poppy flower really. I like the intention, but many people are associating it now with other goals. So we have created these two hands, it's dua, and inside is a poppy flower, but it's not with a dot, it's with a square, and it refers to the Kaaba. This is a Muslim symbol we're trying to integrate within the Muslim community to give their own poppy flower, their own symbol of remembrance. It's making dua for the unknown fallen Muslim soldiers. And the elements are all there, the hands, the flower, and the symbol, the center of the universe, the Kaaba. And I must say, many British people really like the symbol. They really like it. They said, oh, it's really powerful. I have the same with a dot. That's for all the soldiers. And I have the one with the squares. So the website is Unknown Prayers. Because I'm working on the second book, The Unknown Prayers, but I'm running late with COVID. I don't have access in the archives until everything opens again. I'm just terminating it here. I hope you could pick something interesting for you. I didn't waste your time. And Richard, I give the word back to you.
Oh, well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. It was very moving and very enlightening, and I had no idea about that Moroccan contingent in the Battle of the Marne and things, and it's a staggering amount of research you must have put in. I mean, it's so impressive, and you know, we're very grateful. It was beautifully done, and the photos really brought the history alive, so thank you so much. I'm really blown away by it. So I basically want to open it to everyone. If you've got a question for Luc, if you want to raise your hand physically or on the chat participants thing, if you want to, and Yulia will unmute you, and then we'll ask about how we can get hold of a copy. And as Luc said, you know, it'd be great if we could maybe buy copies that can end up in libraries and schools and you know, raise awareness about this, because it's and it's very much in line with our own sort of goals and mission and ambition to build bridges between communities and faiths and countries, and obviously Britain and Morocco, but you know, a broader, you know, what we're trying to do with the BMS very much ties in with Luc's project. So whoever wants to kick off with a question, I've got a couple as well, but would anyone like to raise their hand first of all?
Yeah, may I?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fascinating talk, Luc. Really very interesting. And you raised a lot of questions actually throughout your talk. And they are very current as well, and what's going on globally today. Not only in Europe, but also in America, especially during the Trump mandate. And it's very, very unfortunate that there is still a lot of ignorance about the contribution of Muslims to Europe, not only the First World War, but also the Second World War. I can mention to you that actually my father was part of the First World War. He was there, and he actually had 7 bullets in him, trying to defend the French against the Germans at the time. I was just wondering, when you actually talked in the States about the experience of the Muslims in the First World War, what sort of reaction did you get from the military, from the politicians, and from the masses there? Thank you.
Oh, that's a very good question. You know, I'm guilty as well as my own prejudice, because when I received the first time the invitation to talk about my book at the Harvard University, I thought it was a scam. I thought it was a joke. I said, "What do you mean Harvard University about me? You know, I'm a researcher. I don't have a degree in history." But they did their homework. They checked, they called other archives and history. They knew me, the book. So I have to overcome. And then when I got the invitation, said, "Oh yeah, this is great." Now, the first question that I got asked then, and still asked today, is, what do the Muslims think about your work? How is your work received within the Muslim community? And that's a very, very tricky question, because a lot of Muslim influencers don't like my book. A lot of people don't like building bridges. Division is better for them, creating hate. You get more money when you push or you moan. The book, what I do, I'm not complaining. I'm not finger pointing, not the Germans, not the Ottoman, not the British Empire. I'm just telling human stories. Now, but I want always to keep on the positive side. We need positive news. There are plenty of people who will try to look for the eagle in the haystack to tell something bad and things like that. But in America, the book has been very well received, but we are here in the same catch-22 as we have in Europe. They're waiting for Muslim influencers to make a public statement that my book is not something like Salman Rushdie, that I'm not offending Muslims. And that's not happening yet. We have a conversation with Muslim influencers, but they're confused because they didn't know either. They didn't know their history. And then you have, of course, a non-Muslim bringing that story up. For them, it's like, we have an overwhelming response by the grassroots community. Really, young people love that story because it's positive. It makes them feel proud of their historical backgrounds. It makes them feel proud about their religion as well. And also that there's no clash of civilizations. That proves it. Soldiers were fighting shoulder to shoulder. And certainly Morocco, when I explained them that Moroccan soldiers, Muslims, were fighting shoulder by shoulder with Jews, Moroccan soldiers. I have to explain that in 1914, there was a large Jewish community in Morocco, respected. There was no thing, they didn't see I'm a Muslim Moroccan soldier and he is a Jewish soldier. We didn't, and I looked for it. I really looked for it. If there were religious incidents between Jewish Moroccans and Muslim Moroccans, maybe they are, but we haven't found them yet. So all this is very well received in America, is a message of peace, trying to push back against white supremacy, about all these hate groups. But they're a bit confused. I mean, some people are holding off because we haven't got top endorsement from Muslim influencers, which is harming our project anyway, slowing it down. But I hope we will get it, but it is confusing, like with the wildfires, the network in California, where I am in San Francisco, is very bad. Now, I'm giving this presentation in the sanctuary of a building that's a synagogue and a church. It's from the Shir Shalom congregation and from the Episcopal Church. This is why I'm sitting in. They have the best internet connection. And they love my book, they love my project, they embrace it. Now, last week I had a discussion with some Muslim chairmen of organizations, and they were lost. They say, why do Jews like the book? Why do Episcopal priests like it? I said, because it's about us, it's about people, it's about humanity, it's about peace. You know, these soldiers are telling us a story. These Muslims are telling us a story we can use today. These Moroccan soldiers telling us how it should be. So it is a struggle. The armed forces in America are talking for the moment with the British armed forces. What kind of guy I am. I must tell you, I have been scrutinized by intelligence. You wouldn't believe it. You know, in each country, I've been interrogated by MI5, MI6 when I arrived in Morocco. Before I was invited to the military archives, I was interrogated by the military intelligence, what I was doing in Morocco, why I was doing that project, what my agenda was, because I was a Christian, I was not French, I was Belgium, you know, all these things. And then when they learn to know you and they follow you, after 5 years, I'm staying on that rented line. I don't involve in politics. I don't get involved in debates that they're setting up people. I'm just telling stories about soldiers and laborers in the trenches and how they experience it. So that's a good thing. I only hope that the American armed forces get on board as well, because my project has been held in the British armed forces, because I was telling their stories to soldiers before they were sent off to the Middle East, and they loved it. They said, no, we can engage and tell these people when we arrive in the Middle East or the Far East, we know your contribution. So we changed quite some British soldiers, their view, and said, I didn't know we ever fought together in the trenches. So it helped them a lot. And then we got feedback from British soldiers while they were there that the counterpart, the Arab counterpart, didn't know either, that they didn't believe it. They said, what are you telling me? Thing like that. So it's positive. We just need a little bit pushback more from the Muslim community, because nobody wants to offend Muslims. And it's a very topic, you know, non-Muslim communities, they're sometimes very afraid to do something because we have the images from Charlie Hebdo insulting the Prophet. So, and because I'm a non-Muslim, they want to know, are we not offending any Muslim? So a lot of people here and also in the UK are waiting for a strong endorsement from Muslim leaders to say, no, the book is not haram. It is a good book. It's beneficiary for both of us. Does that answer your question, Ali Bahaju?
Yes, actually, you also mentioned about the influencers.
Yes.
Muslim influencers. Are they shying away because of 9/11, or because of the rise of the far right at the moment in Europe and America?
It's both said. I'm going to be very straight with that. So we are being hit from two sides. We are being hit by the far right, who is attacking us on social media every day. But we're also being attacked from Muslim extremism, who don't like that, who are saying that these Moroccan soldiers were traitors because they fought against the Ottoman Empire. They destroyed the last caliphate. And that is nonsense, because it was not a religious war. It has nothing to do with it. You know, the fatwa was useless. And the strongest statement we got, and the opportunity to enter a debate with people who believe that idea, and it's very toxic, but it's very strong, was we had an exhibition in London on our book. And one day we got people from the Turkish embassy visiting us. And they came to me and they said, this is beautiful. There's no blame game. You're not blaming the Ottomans and you're not mentioning the Armenian genocide or whatever. They said, these soldiers didn't care. They didn't even know. I cannot put something, their stories, by politics. I'm just telling their stories. And they liked it so much that they invited our exhibition to stay for, I think, 2 months in the Yunus Emre Institute. That maybe you know is a Turkish cultural center. And so I invited a lot of these people who were attacking us with that toxic narrative, say, visit our exhibition, talk about the Ottomans, talk about the Allied contribution, together with the Turkish Cultural Center director, because I had to explain my part at the center, at the Turkish Cultural Center, to a lot of Turkish people who after the meeting loved it. They said, wow, this is a positive message. They never came. None of them came. So a missed opportunity. Yeah. So this is the struggle we have. And once I talk, it fades away because they have it's fake news, you know, it's fake. You push it away. But they are withholding me of getting into schools, getting into madrasa, getting in the libraries here, because if I get to a non-Muslim school, a traditional school, kids love the story. But then you're taking away the prejudice because they said, we know that what we see today is not normal. And that's what they try to do. They're trying to establish a culture where we see all the hate and the division as a new normal. It's not. You know, I had many presentations that people start to shout at me. I had a presentation, I don't know, it was in the British Library, that when I mentioned the fact that Maria is more mentioned in the Quran than in the Bible, somebody out the audience shouted at me, liar. And I asked him, have you read the Quran? I'm not making that up. You know, sometimes they go berserk if I say, do you know that we have the same prophet, Moses, Jesus? They don't believe me. I have to explain to kids here, Muslims, Jesus is a prophet of one of them. They respect him enormously. And think I'm making that up. So we have a long way to go, but I'm using my research to explain that because these illiterate soldiers, they knew that. We lost so much know-how over the 100 years. It has been suppressed. So we need to get it back open.
Thank you.
Who else would like to ask a question?
I like to go on if there is nobody else.
Well, sorry, but we've got one from Saleh Haskouri, who says, what about Muslims who were involved in Allied espionage, as well as those who contributed financially? Are those part of your research?
In the First World War?
Yeah.
I have no knowledge of Muslims who spied for the Allied forces in Germany.
There was a lady, actually.
Who?
There was a lady called Khan, but I think it's probably
that's Second World War. That's Second World War. That's second. Yes. The Second World War. That's not the First one. Beautiful story as well.
Yeah, very nice story actually.
Yeah,
it's only recently that's been recognized by the government.
We promoted that.
Archives, they have to reveal it.
Well, it's very, the recovery of that story, we launched that. And it's a very strange story. When we were in Paris doing research over there, in a nutshell, Richard, I'm going to keep it short, but it shows how destiny works. The server count was in the package when we were doing research. The first mosque in France was built honoring the soldiers of the First World War, the Muslim soldiers from Algeria, Tunis, and Morocco. So the French government gave the Muslims who stayed there, the laborers and who were remaining there, they needed to place some place outside Paris. which nobody wanted because it was a lot of ruins and catacombs. So it was a nice gesture, but a bit, you know, poisoned.
Yeah.
And the Muslims, they said, oh, thank you, we're going to accept your offer and that land to build a mosque, and we're going to respect the catacombs because it's from the Christians in ancient time. So they start building the central mosque, the Grand Mosque, and everything went well. In the Second World War, Jews are being persecuted, and the imam of that mosque, his father fought in the First World War, and he said, look, we have to do something. And he starts to hide Jews in the catacombs underneath the Grand Mosque in Paris. Now, we found a lot of documents on that, and it's really, really fascinating and beautiful. So the Gestapo and the SS got informed, or they got an idea that these Jews were being saved by Muslims. So they raided on several occasions on Friday when there was Juma, on the Friday prayer at the mosque. And even that everybody in the mosque knew the catacombs were filled with Jews and British pilots. There were 2 British pilots, they hide over there. Nobody said a word. And you know, the Gestapo and the SS, you don't want to be taken away by them. It's like Daesh, ISIS, you know. Nobody spoke. And it's there we found that record as well of calm. But once again, there is such a beautiful story. If you see what's happening to France today, nobody talks about it. It tells a lot about Muslims, but it's a coincidence. It's something that I like to ask people to think about. If these soldiers of the First World War would not have been fighting so hard, there would have been no mosque in Paris. There would have been no hiding for the Jews. You have something, destiny, you know. I don't know.
There is a film actually about this. There is a documentary about the guy who was the imam called Belghabrit.
Yeah.
He was the imam of the mosque in Paris, and he was harboring a lot of Jews who were sought after by the Nazis at the time when they occupied Paris. Thank you.
So Luc, you mentioned in passing your grandfather, but can you tell us a little bit more about what he did in the First World War and how that sparked your interest?
He is the cause of all my misery.
I wouldn't call that a misery, actually.
Okay.
Valuable contribution.
Okay, well, I was a manager in aviation, and with the commemoration starting up in 2012, my grandmother started to ask me, you need to read the diaries of your grandfather. And I was like, yeah. You know, what would I care? The First World War, I have my life. But every time I saw my grandmother, she was there with the same question. And you all know, grandmothers, they never give up. They never give up. So it was more of embarrassment, or that I was afraid to see her the next time and say I didn't, that I went up to the attics and start looking in all the stuff over there and look for his diaries. So I started reading his diaries, and it was there that I was surprised that he mentioned Muslims. I didn't know the Allied forces were fighting with Muslims. I was very ignorant. But I knew from my grandmother that my grandfather was a very devout Christian, and I mean really devout. He was one of these people who said his prayer before every meal. He went to the church every morning at 6:30. So, and that was a sharp contrast. My father, who was a very devout Christian, was writing so admirable about his Muslim brother in arms. He does few words and how much respect he got. And he writes in his diaries how he noticed how much energy and courage these Muslims drained from making their prayers 5 times a day. I was like, what is he talking about? Muslims, you know, even in 2012, Islam, bad, you know. That doesn't make sense. And it's the lack of material, of finding that in the libraries, that I took the decision to create a foundation to respect my grandfather and his Muslim brother in arms. But I thought it would take 6 months, 1 year, and then I would wrap it up. And look where I am now. It's really So that's the origin of the story.
That's nice, actually.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask something else. You said that you estimate, say, 63,000 or up to 75,000 Moroccans. Were they all going willingly, or there was no compulsory recruitment?
Well, that's a very interesting, because I like to spread off that debate. First of all, compulsory and voluntary. Based on the personal diaries, everybody made his own choice to join for several reasons. Some did it for honor. Some tribes love to fight. You know, they came from warrior tribes in Morocco and Algeria, the people from Kabyle. Some did it because the Sultan called them to. They were very respectful. So there was a call from the Sultan, who was also the main religious figure. So they joined. And the voluntary, there's a very limit. Because I like to compare with the British soldiers, the soldiers in Scotland. If you see the propaganda in the UK, what happened to you if you didn't join the armed forces, you received a white feather. The social pressure on the soldiers to join was so intense that I doubt, was it voluntarily or was it compulsory? Where does it start? Also, for the people in Morocco, the only way to keep their family alive was joining the war, was joining the armed forces, because then they got enough money to feed their family. At that moment, if you take that decision, is that voluntary or compulsory? It's something you have to be careful on. They volunteer to join the war, but if you read a personal letter that they're sending all the money to the family, and then you do research in Morocco, that they are surviving thanks to the money. Even if they died on the battlefield, they got a small pension, very little, but they got a way of life. So I'm very careful with that questions, because I have to look at the personal letters. So what I really hate is that we globalize everything. They were all compulsory, they were all forced, they were all voluntary. I like to respect each soldier's his own decision, and then it makes it more complex. So this is why I try to explain, everybody had their decision or none. So that's something that I want to clarify. Most of them volunteered. I think I found 7 records of Moroccan soldiers who had the choice of going to jail or join the armed forces, 7. So most of them volunteered. But volunteered, Richard, feeding their family.
Yes, I think you're quite right about that, because most of them actually volunteered because they, first of all, because of the poverty at the time, and also of the ignorance, they were not educated, and most importantly, it's because they wanted to feed the family. And to them, that was probably the most important, compelling obligation for them to join the army at the time.
Great. Well, if no one else has got a question, I think that the burning question is how can we buy the book, Luc?
We have a website, the Unknown Prayers. So
okay.
Because we try to be as much as possible stay in the same system. So the fulfillment is done by the bravest British factory. These are all veterans who are being held by society. So this is why we created the Unknown Prayers website, where you can buy the book, and they send it up to all the people worldwide. We also have the Doer Prayers. So thank you for purchasing the book. please share my email if people have more questions, because I thought, Richard, I thought Mike would put
Yes.
his hand up.
I thought he did actually as well.
Sorry, Mike.
No.
Yeah, I mean, before we go, Mike wanted to say a few words anyway, but we can put out an email to all our members saying, you know, if you missed the talk, you can get to see it, the recording, on Facebook and on our website. And then we can also put out your details and how people can get hold of the book. Would you rather do that than people, for example, I had a look, you can buy it on Amazon, but would you rather we went through your website?
On Amazon. We're not on Amazon. We have, I will tell you, we had a retailer who ordered some books from us. He never paid us, and he's dropping the books on Amazon. So we don't see any money from Amazon.
Oh, okay,
Well,
so Jeff Bezos has enough money, I think.
Yeah. So please use the Unknown Prayers or share with it and promote this. It's also our only income. So the presentations I give, the lectures I give, and the book, and the jewel.
Yeah, well, we're very grateful. It was a wonderful talk. So Mike, you wanted to say a few words as well.
Yeah, thank you. And could I just, the question I was going to ask actually is the one that Richard asked, which is how you become so personally engaged, which is through your grandfather. So thank you for that. So my name's Mike, and I'm the chair of the British Moroccan Society. I just want to say a few words. There are a lot of old friends in the room here, but I'm conscious that watching on Facebook and also watching later on Catch Up, we'll have an audience who are not so familiar with the BMS. So as Richard said earlier, the BMS is very much about building bridges between cultures, and especially promoting stronger links between two kingdoms which are very close to our heart, and those are the kingdoms of the UK and Morocco. So we hold regular events like this one, social events. Some are more sort of socially oriented rather than educational, and you know, we've had my wife and I've been members for nearly 20 years. I think we have a lot of fun together. We've made some great friends here. We also support a variety of charities in Morocco, mostly smaller charities where our members have connections, and we are really close to where the money that we raise goes. So we've got a really exciting program of events, and special mention to Richard, who's during the sort of the winter of COVID has managed to keep a fantastic online program going. We have a bit of a dilemma at the moment, really, because we have so much to bring, and we're actually grappling with what we do online and what we do in person. So I think during the course of April, we're going to have to make some decisions, and on our website, the British Moroccan Society, and also our social media and Facebook and so on, you will see you'll see more in the coming weeks on that. But I think, yeah, I'd just like to thank you very much, Luc, for a fantastic evening, a very memorable evening, and thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to those who I know that there are many people who are watching on websites and YouTube and Facebook and the like, and in the Netflix age, an awful lot will be watching on Catch Up as well. So thanks to you all, and we're really happy to bring Luc's work to a little bit wider audience.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for hosting us. I want to thank everybody, and Richard and you for doing the slides, and yeah, thank you for spreading the news. And I think every little bit we can do to bring Morocco and Britain closer and tell them about our shared history. I think the impact with the next generation will be huge, but it's good. And I really admire the tremendous work you do with your organizations to help charities in Morocco, and to keep the communication going on, sometimes in difficult circumstances, but keeping the conversation going on. It's much needed today. Thank you so much, all.
Thank you so much. And let's stay in touch, and maybe you can come and give a talk in Morocco one day as well.
Yes, I think that would be great, actually.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch with everyone. Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.